Alright, in this video we're going to be looking at setting our graphing window. And so in order for us to set our graphing window, we need a graph to look at. So let's go ahead and go to your y equals, and you should have solved the graphing example for y, and now we're ready to enter it into our y equals. And so we're going to enter in -4/3. And I just want to show you real fast how to enter in that 4/3 as a fraction. If you hit your math button and then scroll across the top over to fraction, you've got a few options, and the first option gives you a simple fraction. The second option gives you the option for a mixed number. If you look at option 3, you can change any fraction to a decimal or a decimal to a fraction. And then option 4 gives you the opportunity to go from a simple fraction or an improper fraction to a mixed number. So for this one, we're just going to use our simple fraction, and now we have a place to put our 4/3. Alright, so -4/3 x minus 2. And so there's the equation that we're going to be looking at as we're setting our graphing window. So if we go ahead and hit graph, we have a really nice image of our graph here. But if we wanted to put another graph in here, like let's go ahead and go back to our y equals, because not all equations graph well in our standard view. So let's go ahead and type something in like 8x plus 60. Okay? Now when we go to graph, we see our original graph very nice and squarely, but our second graph is off to the left of the screen, or if I had changed it to something like maybe a negative y-intercept, like -60, we wouldn't even see our graph on our screen. So what we can do is we can change our window. If you press your window button, you'll see that our standard window sets are given with x-min and y-mins at -10, and our x and y maxes at 10, and our scale set at 1. That means that our grids increase by 1 each time as it moves along our axes. And so if we wanted to, we could increase our window size by, let's go ahead and change it maybe to -25. And whoops, what did I do wrong? There's my syntax error. Let's go ahead and go to our error and fix it. I entered in the subtraction sign instead of the negative, so let's fix that. We've got -25, and there we go, and then +25. And then in our y-min, we can change it to -25 and +25. Now when I hit my graph, I get a little bit more of my image on my screen. We can see both graphs being graphed, and I can see them nice and square. Notice too that my tick marks changed because I'm still increasing by 1. In our window, we can also change the value that each of these increase. So let's say I wanted to change my x scale to 5 and my y scale to 5. You're going to see that now when I go back to my graph, my tick marks are a lot further apart. And so when your students are looking at a graph on their calculator, or you're looking at something that a student's graphed, it's important to know their window settings, because as you're seeing these tick marks, it could represent 1 as you go along, or 5, 10, 20, whatever the situation requires. Now there's one more thing that I want to explore with you in this video, and let's go ahead and go back to our y equals, and we're going to enter in a third equation. Now let's say you wanted to keep these equations still in your y equals. If you scroll over to highlight the equal sign on your calculator and press enter, it will unhighlight those graphs so that they can remain in our y equals, but they will be hidden when we go to press our graph. But if we go to our y3, and let's enter in an equation like 9x squared plus 36. And so we can go ahead and graph that. And we're not going to see it on our graph because we have the plus 36, so we're going to need to change our window. Let's change our y max to something like 75 so that we can view that graph. And there it is. Let's also go ahead and change our x min and max. Let's change this to negative 10 and positive 10. Let's get a good image of this graph, and we could even change our y min back to 0 to see if that gives us a better image of our graph. There we go, a little bit better. So what I want to show you now is our trace functions. And so if you want to trace along your graph, you can press the trace button and then scroll, and it's going to scroll along your graph to give you some values. If you notice, as I'm scrolling, my numbers, my x and y values are not very pretty. And so one of the ways that we can do that is by changing our windows to something that's nice and pretty. And so let's look at two window functions that can help us with that. Both of them can be accessed by pressing our zoom function, and you'll see lots of different zoom options. Zoom 6, the zoom standard, was that very first window that I showed you where we had the defaults of the negative 10 and the positive 10 for our x and y minimums and maximums. But if you go ahead and press zoom 8, we're going to go ahead and press zoom 8, that's going to take me to zoom integer. Okay, and if I press enter again, that's going to change the window of my graph, and it's not a very pretty picture, but now when I press trace and I go along my graph, notice that my x values are increasing by one integer at a time. Even as I go to the left, I can see what my y values are as my x increases and decreases by 1. So that's your zoom integer, and that's one of our what we call friendly windows for tracing. And the second would be also in your zoom function, and that's zoom 4, that's your decimal option. So remember, zoom 8 was your integer, zoom 4 is going to be your decimal option. And again, it changes my window. I don't necessarily have a good image of my graph, but let's press enter again to make sure everything's set, and let's see what happens when I press trace now. When I press trace now, with my zoom decimal, I'm increasing by 1/10 at a time. And so I'm able to see nice, pretty numbers as it increases by tenths. And so even though I'm not able to see my image of my graph on my screen, by using my zoom integer and zoom decimal windows, I'm able to trace along my graph at nice changes in my x value, so I can get nice pretty numbers. And that's going to be really helpful for your students as they're exploring your graph. All right, and that's it.